Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Envision IT webinar. If you are in the process of looking at your intranet or updating your intranet, this is an exciting time to do this. The number of tools that are coming out to help the job of content authors and improve the experience of end users has never been greater. I'm Kevin Smith. I'm the CMO for Envision IT. And I've been a marketing person for over 25 years. I've used dozens of intranet tools and content authoring tools. A lot of my job has been generating internal content and generating external content. I work with content teams and I've helped them build content workflows. So I'm really excited about some of the stuff that's coming down the line here. I want to give you a little bit of our Teams etiquette, just so you know. You are going to be muted, just so that we have a good experience for everybody. The chat is open through the webinar, so you can chat with us. You can use the Q&A panel, and we will answer questions at a couple points in the presentation. This will be recorded, so you may be watching this tomorrow. But if you want to come back and rewatch, it'll be available within 24 hours after the event. With that, I want to introduce Peter. Many of you, Peter, of course. Peter's our president. He's the 15 times MVP. Had just come back from the latest MVP summit, and with that has brought a lot of stuff to talk about. There's some NDA stuff that he can't talk about, but what we can talk about is really exciting. So Peter, why don't you take it off?
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, it was a little tricky because, at the MVP Summit, they were sharing things that were publicly available, as well as obviously stuff that is under NDA, and got to be very careful to make sure that we're not leaking anything from that perspective. So we were spending a lot of time in our own tenants kind of, can we actually see this feature? Is it out there and available? And then partway through the talk, I'm going to talk about how you light up some of those new features and how that works. But let's start. I was like the little forward spoiler of what are some of the key takeaways that we're going to come out of this webinar with. And first and foremost, like everything else, AI is changing everything very quickly, and it's overwhelming even for as an MVP and somebody that's deep in the Microsoft tech stack to keep up with what's coming down the pipe from Microsoft. But the new SharePoint that was announced at the SharePoint 25 event last month, an AI in SharePoint that was announced last fall, is part of what we're going to be showing here today. It's really exciting what they're doing from there. Microsoft's really raised the bar with what you can do for your company intranet. So from an agenda point of view, we're going to start with sort of some background, what defines a modern intranet. I will spend a little bit of time on the new SharePoint and AI in SharePoint features. Then we're going to get into some patterns and practices that we employ in designing a modern intranet in SharePoint Online. And then we're going to wrap things up with the deeper dive on the AI experiences, particularly from a content author's perspective. Let's start with the way we work has changed. Yes, there's back to office mandates. In fact, this was happening on the Microsoft campus when I was out there, but it was funny, they had a bunch of new buildings that weren't fully outfitted and didn't have furniture and things like that. So I was talking to some of the full-time Microsoft staff, and they're like, yeah, we're supposed to be back in the office 3 days a week, but we don't actually have an office yet. We don't have monitors, desks, things like that. So everybody's playing catch up. It is hybrid. And then you throw AI into that's changing everything for everybody. It's very fast-paced. It's very distributed. But for a lot of organizations, their intranet is still stuck back in 2015. So we've got too many sites. The content authoring is a challenge. Policies are always not an important part of intranet, so they're hard to find or they're outdated. Search often doesn't work or it overworks. It's a mess from that perspective. And maybe now it just makes no sense through there. So how do we improve that? How do we make it better for all of your staff, whether they're the content authors or the staff throughout the organization that are consuming that content? Because obviously there's different kinds of pain. There's going to be user frustrations that staff may have difficulty finding information. Maybe they're finding out of date information and interpreting it as current and making the wrong decisions. And who do they tell about that? Who are the content owners from there? Challenges around the content owners. I'm a fan of distributed content authoring on an intranet. Your internal comms team, if you have one, is probably going to be a big part of the intranet, but they shouldn't be the gatekeepers of everything in the intranet. You do want the different departments to have their own voice and their own place to publish things out. So there's often a large number of content authors in a bigger organization. And how do they manage that? How do they become effective? And obviously, both of those things are going to have an organizational impact, whether that's productivity, disengagement, just your staff portal, your intranet should be setting the tone and the culture for your organization. And if it's failing at that, particularly in a hybrid or remote scenario, that's a big fail. Like you don't have the opportunity of maybe as frequent in-person town halls and face-to-face meetings and things like that to build that culture. So your online presence internally is going to be a big part of that. At the end of the day, your modern intranet should really be your front door to work. It should be the starting point for your workday. When your staff come in, it may be a pass through to say, I go there to find where I'm going to go and connect to my different systems. But if people never go there, that's obviously a fail from there. It should be structured for discovery. That's a key word that we're going to come back to in terms of how Microsoft is positioning SharePoint in the new SharePoint. It should be intelligent. AI can serve a lot of purposes, and we're going to touch on a number of different parts of that. But it should be personalized. It should be engaged. Now, when we're talking with organizations about intranets, that's typically only one part of their communication strategy. And this is going to be different for different organizations. Are you a team-centric organization, SharePoint, email-based, Viva Engage? Microsoft's a little bit challenging because they give you a lot of different tools and doesn't necessarily make sense to use all of them. As you get to be a bigger organization into thousands or tens of thousands of employees, maybe. But for Vision IT, for example, we're a 24-person company. We're not a massive organization. And you'll see actually when we get into some of the AI discovery, we played around with using SharePoint as our news vehicle back in 2018. We haven't really updated it since then. We are not an email-centric organization. We are 100% a team-centric organization. We almost never send emails to each other. It's all through Teams, ideally through channel conversations, but obviously lots of chat happening there as well. So Teams, in all honesty, has become our primary communications channel for us as an organization. And that's a little bit of a challenge because we can't always show you what we're doing for clients in their intranets because that's private and personal to that organization. We're going to use our own. Take it with a grain of salt. There's sometimes not as much content as you'd like to see in there. And then Viva Engage, the whole Viva suite is taking a diminishing role at Microsoft. They've deprecated or quietly shut down a bunch of the Viva services. They've renamed some, like Viva Connections is now just Connections. It's not really a Viva thing anymore. But Viva Engage, which is what that icon represents, is still very much an investment area for Microsoft. And for some organizations, that can be a powerful tool. So really thinking about how do you communicate things like news and events out to your staff? Is it a email distribution group? Is it a dedicated all company Teams channel? Is it through SharePoint News? Do you have Viva Engaged communities, or maybe all of those above? Viva does help with the multimodal to say, hey, you may have different people in your organization that consume in different ways. Can you push it to more than one of those, or maybe all of them, depending on your organization? But let's pause for a minute and kind of recap a few things of what's come out from Microsoft and the SharePoint 25 event. For those of you that weren't aware or didn't tune into it, SharePoint just turned 25 years old back in March. We actually worked with SharePoint 2001 internally. I like to joke that we never inflicted it on any clients. We did inflict 2003 and then 2007 and all the versions from there. So we've been along for the journey right from the beginning, and it's been amazing to see how that journey has gone. I like where Microsoft's going with this concept of this discover, publish, build, and you're going to see it in the UI itself. Discover is really how do you find the content that's relevant to you? So that personalized piece. The publish is how do you make it easier for the content authors to push that out, whether it's to SharePoint or to Outlook, Teams, Viva as part of that. And then the build piece, SharePoint is a platform. You can build a lot on it. So how do you create sites, lists, libraries, and how do you use AI agents to do that? So I'm going to use our Envision IT as an example for there. Now, our homepage of Envision IT isn't terribly overwhelming. We don't have a lot on there as a landing page to get to our different applications. We do have a demo portal that we've built out using a lot of the new features in here. The problem is it's not real. It doesn't have current content in there. So I always worry a little bit when I go through these demos because I'm never sure what's going to come up as we share pages out. But you can see on the left rail here is the new Discover Build. They're actually calling it post in here. Sometimes it's published, sometimes it's post. It seems to be transitioning with Microsoft through there. I've got my OneDrive I do have the ability to turn off the new SharePoint experience. I'll show you in a minute where the levers are to turn some of these features on organizationally wide, but then individual users can opt back and say, hey, I want to go back to the previous experience from there. If I come to the Discover rail, in the rail here, though, interestingly, I like to think of this as the new Delve. And for those of you that remember Delve, it was basically a discovery tool to discover what are people working on around you, what's happening in your organization. And it freaks a lot of people out because they thought, hey, I'm seeing in here, what are my coworkers like Logan or Mark or Maha working on in here, and what are the documents? And I'm not going to drill into these because these are billing documents that Logan's working on, sprint demos that Mark's working on. This is actual work that they're doing. And I'm a little bit surprised, actually. Delve had an underwhelming disclaimer here to say, hey, we're not going to expose anything in here to other people about what you're doing unless they already have access to it. So it's all permission trimmed and you're only seeing things that you're allowed to see, but it's using signals and they're now calling it organizational IQ, information about the organization itself that's collected by Microsoft and surfaced back up to people relevant to who they are. So what are the new things that people are working on? This Claude Meets Copilot article is one that we're about to publish that Kevin and I have been working on. I can see that he's got it in practice here. In fact, he's going to use it as part of his walkthrough as a content author experience through there. This may not be lit up in your tenant, but let's actually go through and talk about what you need to do to actually set that up. And it took me quite a while. I used both Claude and Copilot to explore the current state and understand what was NDA that Microsoft was talking about, what's actually in public general availability, and what's in the different previews that they have that you can turn on in your tenant. So the first is that new SharePoint experience. That left rail that had the Discover build publish on it is something that you set up in the SharePoint admin. So if I'm coming over here into my SharePoint admin, in my settings area here, I always get lost as I'm going through here. Where are we here? The new SharePoint experience. Yes. It's simply a checkbox to say enable the new SharePoint experience. And it turns it on for the whole organization. Unlike some of the other features, you don't have the ability to scale it back for particular users, but individual users can choose to turn it off as part of that. So that's one lever that you have. The next is targeted release. So you have a choice as an organization to say, hey, I want to wait till things are a little bit baked and it's in general availability before it lights up in my tenant, or I want to see the latest and greatest as soon as it hits. I want to be on one of those first rings as Microsoft deploys it out. So us as a Microsoft partner, we always want to at least match or be ahead of what's happening with our clients. So we turn targeted release on. That you configure in the Microsoft 365 admin. If I come into my organization settings, my org profile, there's a release preference here that I can define to say, hey, I want to be in targeted release. Now we've set it for everyone in our organization. This one you can actually scope it down and say, hey, I only want targeted release for select users. So different people in your org, maybe your IT team that's going to support this stuff should see it first before the rest of the organization sees it. You can decide what that looks like in your organization. This next one, the Anthropic, or a lot of people know it as Claude. Anthropic is the company. Claude is the sort of the commercial tool that you can subscribe to interact with the Anthropic models. Microsoft's made an interesting decision. They decided we're not going to bet everything on OpenAI. Even though they have a fairly significant ownership stake in OpenAI, they're taking what they're calling a multi-model approach to say, hey, we'll use the right model for the right scenario. We're not stuck on everything being OpenAI. So you have the option as a M365 admin to say, hey, I want to actually turn on the Anthropic settings. So if I come back to my M365 admin here for a second, this is where it gets a little confusing. There's a settings for M365. You won't actually find it in here. You have to go up into the Copilot area, and there's yet another settings in here. And you have to come into the view all to see it. And it doesn't say Anthropic. It says, hey, do we provide other AI providers in here? Once you drill into that, right now, Anthropic is the only choice. But as Microsoft lights up other sub-processors, I imagine they'll have other options in here. So we've turned this on for our organization. Again, it's an organization-wide setting through there. The next one is AI in SharePoint. This one's a little bit trickier. So first, you need to have the Anthropic turned on for it to work, but you also need to run some PowerShell. And that post that Kevin and I are working on, I'd hope to publish it before this webinar. We're going to publish it probably later today, and it'll be part of the follow-up out. But there's some PowerShell that you need to run. Not this one. Sorry, I've got too many things open here. So you need to be an administrator. And basically, it's this setting here to allow the knowledge agent scope. You can scope to your entire tenant, which is what we've done, or you say, hey, I only want it on certain tenants from there. And then the last piece is this Copilot Frontier. It's another setting in the M365 admin Copilot settings. So if I come out of here, where do we have Frontier? They actually have a search on here, which makes it easy to find things. So Copilot Frontier is what I'm looking for. And again, you can scope this to specific users. We've left it on to all users through here. Now, the other caveat to understand is a lot of these features require a full Copilot license to use. Now, we've licensed Copilot for our whole team. Most organizations haven't rolled out that far. We're doing a ton of Copilot pilots and readiness for clients. I think we've got about 4 or 5 different projects with different clients going on right now, but it does require that to light up the full set of features through here. So what does that actually mean? If I turn that Anthropic setting on, what actually changes in my tenant? It doesn't actually affect SharePoint. It's actually more about Copilot and Copilot Studio. So you get more models available to you, and Anthropic is better for doing deep research tasks and things like what Kevin's doing, content creation, writing long form articles, things like that. It's actually better at doing that. So having that turned on gives you more capabilities if you have a full Copilot license. And likewise, if you're building your own agents, Copilot Studio, you've got more options in there. Now, maybe you turn off the Anthropic for some reason later and you've built some agents on it, they will fail back to GPT. So if it is later disabled, it doesn't break your agents, they just may not work as optimally through there. How about AI in SharePoint? What does this one do? This one, we're going to go deeper later in the session on, lights up this AI tooltip in SharePoint Modern Pages itself, where you can do lots of different things. As a content consumer, you can summarize content. As a content owner, there's some cool things around improving the site, creating content that Kevin and I are going to take you through later as part of that. And then Copilot Frontier, it's like the targeted release, but it's a separate program from Microsoft. And it's basically saying, I want some of the new AI features while they're still in preview before they go to general availability. So it's an ever-shifting landscape of features that are available, and I encourage you to follow this link through. We're going to provide the deck as well as the recording to the Microsoft page, and they'll explain, hey, what's come out through the Frontier program, what's maybe already gone to general availability, or what you need to be opted in as part of that. So I wanted to go through that to give some context to say things are really changing. There's a lot of new experiences in AI as part of SharePoint and Microsoft 365, and you really need to think about that. Even if you haven't bought any Copilot license for your organization, you should be keeping an eye to that to say, hey, this is where the world is going, and we want to future-proof for that. So let's come back, though, to the broader non-technical side of what are the things that I should go through from designing a modern intranet and SharePoint Online. And from a big block point of view, a lot of this hasn't changed for a very long time. Information architecture is something that we're talking about from a structure point of view for right back to the beginnings of SharePoint 2001, 2003. There was metadata and content types and richness from that. It's still an important thing as part of that. If you want good answers from AI, if that's where the world is going, the structure and the search are super important to that. The way AI agents like Claude and Copilot work is they take the query that you've asked or the action that you've asked it to perform, and it's ultimately doing search. And you need to have a solid, good working search for that to work. And for that search to work well, it needs a good structure and information architecture underneath that. So it's super important to get those first two right. They're foundational for how people directly interact with your intranet, but they're also super important with how AI agents, the future of work, is going to interact with it as well. Smart experiences, things like Copilot Studio, building grounded agents to specific topics. We're going to talk about that. And making it actionable, saying, hey, it's not just about consuming content, it's a place to take action. That if I need to fill out forms and have workflows around that and governance around that should be part of it as well. But let's start with the structure side and building a structure that scales. Your org chart is going to influence your structure, but really you need to think about it from a user needs point of view and trying to avoid the deep hierarchies that you've often seen in the past from there. It makes it more resilient to reorgs that as sites move and hubs move around, it's easier to accommodate that change. It's not just about knowledge, though, it's about people too. And we're going to talk about that side of it as well. So what are some of the building blocks around that? It's obviously what you build as an information architecture is going to deeply influence what your global navigation is going to look like. And global nav is still a very important way for people to find information. They may go straight to search, they may ask an agent a question, but they may also expect to be able to browse and navigate through that. So you want to support all of those models. Things like hub sites, which have been around for a while in SharePoint, collect similar related sites together and organize them is important. And then is there a local site and page navigation deeper within that? How does the metadata architecture drive that? If you think about news and events as two very common topics on intranets, they have metadata, like when was that news published? When does that event occur? And that can be leveraged as part of the search experience. I want to find future events or past events or an article that's current within the last year on this particular topic. If you don't have that metadata in there in your IA, then search is not going to be able to answer those questions. But then how do we draw user profile into that as well? Maybe you're a new employee and we should be showing different content. We can use audience targeting, which combines user profile information like hire date and department and location and merges it with metadata about the content to say, here's a 101 or starting to work at Envision IT set of articles that should be highlighted for a new hire or highlighted for a particular geography or business role. So how do we do that personalization? Ultimately, we do want to have a flat architecture. In the past, there was deep subsites in many SharePoint intranets and even in collaboration sites. Microsoft's killed that idea and said, hey, you should really have a flat architecture. It's much more resilient to change, and hub sites are a good way to tie that together. So let's actually go through a couple of example information architectures. I'm going to make it real and use real client scenarios. We're not going to go into their intranets themselves. We're just going to look at the structure of that. Now, almost as long as we've been working with SharePoint, we've been using a tool called MindJet from MindManager for building out information architecture. And this is it's a commercial tool. It's actually not an IA tool, it's a brainstorming tool. It's intended to be used with a group to kind of form ideas and build connections and brainstorm stuff together. It's a really quick way to build out information architectures as well. And we have our own legends of icons from Microsoft 365 point of view that we can bring in to highlight what the different elements are that we're breaking out through here. The Smith & Anderson is a Canadian engineering firm, about 1,000 employees across Canada, spread across sort of 4 major offices and then a bunch of smaller offices. So they have double issue. They've got staff working remotely as one part of it. They've also got staff working in different geographies. How do we build something that brings the organization as a whole together? And like many intranets, yeah, there's a tie back to department level and org structure. As part of that, there are top level SharePoint sites around HR, around IT, around engineering being their primary lines of businesses. So there is going to be an influence there as part of that. But then you need to think about where do the different things belong, both from an ownership point of view and from a discovery point of view. Programs and policies is an important part that we're going to talk more deeply on, that we see on pretty much every intranet. Does HR own that? Is there compliance? Is it at the top level? Where does it sit within your organization? So this is something that we can literally bring up on a big screen on a Teams meeting, or even more ideally in a boardroom with a client in a working group, and start to flesh out what that looks like. And Lake Simcoe Regional Conservation Authority, it's a public sector organization. They broke it at a high level between corporate services and authority services. This is the business of being a business, and this is what they actually do, why they exist as an organization, and they've structured it around that. Search obviously being a key part of that. Team sites, we're going to be bringing that in at a later date, and it is something to think about. Is your intranet just the communications portal for pushing content into the organization, or do you want to draw the collaboration side into it? There's no right answer. We've done them both ways. In fact, for Waterfront Toronto, which is a 3-way public sector collaboration between the federal government of Canada, the province of Ontario, and the city of Toronto. If people know Toronto, a lot on the call probably do because we're local here in the Toronto area. The eastern waterfront lands have been an industrial wasteland for centuries. Back in the 1800s, factories were built, wharfs were built. It was a very industrial area. The soil was toxic and contaminated, and it's been vacant land. It's probably one of the most valuable real estate in Canada. And this consortium is basically building a whole new part of Toronto. They actually created a new island. They returned the Don River back to its original form through there. So this organization is doing massive tens of billions of dollars, decades-long project work. So the intranet is not just the core intranet from a publishing point of view, but building out the teams and the projects and the collaboration side of it as well became part of the information architecture and is part of the broader structure. So every organization is a little different. It is a very consultative process, and love going through that with clients and building that in. The other thing to bear in mind is you want to stay in the box with Microsoft. Like in the past, years ago, when SharePoint was on premise, a lot of comms teams said, can you build a staff portal in SharePoint, but please don't make it look like SharePoint. Hide the SharePoint as much as you can. We want our unique brand in there. The challenge was they became heavily customized, and it became very difficult to upgrade them, even to newer on-premise versions, but even more importantly, into SharePoint Online and the modern experiences. So you kind of get locked into that point in time, and you lose the benefit of all the richness that Microsoft is deploying as new features. So for some time now, we've been encouraging clients to say, hey, don't hide SharePoint. You can still bring your brand in, but do it lightly and don't heavily customize. Leverage the features out of the box as much as possible. But Microsoft's got a lot of push, and about a year and a half ago, they launched at a brand center and said, hey, we are going to give you more control around fonts, colors, images, and really managing your brand as part of that, and let you control that in a supported way that we can still manage an evergreen SaaS environment for you and not lock you in at a particular point in there. Now, from a third-party tool point of view, there in the past used to be a lot of product vendors. Valo was one that we worked with that no longer exists, that sort of had intranets in a box that went on SharePoint. And because Microsoft's done so much on the modern intranet side, we don't really see the need for those tools anymore. But from a governance point of view, things about reporting and templating and creation of teams and team sites, whether it's for your intranet portal or for even more importantly on the collaboration side, we do still see not a lot of need for that. So there's a lot of vendors out there, including Envision IT. We have our tenant dashboard product. I'm not going to talk about it here. Feel free to reach out if you're interested in more on that side. So I mentioned navigation as an important point. It's still how a lot of people understand the intranet and how they want to navigate through there. So thinking about the global, the hub, and the local nav. So organization-wide, within the hub area that I'm in and within the individual site that I'm in, what should that nav look like? Don't overload people. Don't make it hugely complex with 3 different visible navs and people don't know where to go. Try and unify it as much as possible. And hub sites are a great way to do that. You can have a single hub nav or global hub and bring that nav across the whole organization. Because ideally, you want people to be anywhere in your site and be able to get somewhere else easily through the nav. And that's the goal here. Now, I mentioned search as a really important piece. It's not just a feature, it is the experience. And I don't just mean the experience for the end user executing a search. It drives so much of the intranet, whether we're talking about PnP search web parts that we'll show in a minute that can pull information in and display them, roll-ups of news and events and policies and things like that. Whether it's the actual search, I just want to find content in my site, or whether I want to actually find people and what that looks like. Or from an AI point of view, those agents absolutely going to depend on a solid search experience to get the right content, to not return answers based on stale content. Getting search correct, it's super important. In fact, a lot of those Copilot readiness engagements that we're doing, we're having that debate around how much time do we spend on cleaning up permissions before we get Copilot going versus after, and how much do we just lock things down from a search point of view so there isn't overexposure and stale content or content people shouldn't actually be getting answers for returned back as part of AI agents. So it's a very much a balancing act and a very important part of the experience. I mentioned, though, search isn't just from a content search point of view. If I come back to browser, this one here, if I just come up to my home in here, yes, I've got my search bar here, and users really want a good experience through here. I can use the new discovery features, but being able to search through this is actually a really important piece as well. If I want to just search for the word SharePoint as a quick example that'll hit on lots of stuff in our tenant, I see content coming back through here. But I have different verticals. I can say I'm actually looking for a file as part of that. And maybe I'm looking for a PowerPoint presentation, because I rarely create a new presentation from scratch. I always pull pieces from past presentations. And you can already see the presentation that I'm presenting actually coming up in the top of my list here through here. But maybe I want to make sure I've got current content. So let's just filter it down to stuff in the last month. So there's a few different ones through in here, but that's actually the one that I want. So that search conversation of, yes, I've typed in a Google style search, but now I can refine it and get exactly what I'm looking for is super important through there. Now, there's also the people side to it as well, to say, hey, how do I find the right people? Now, maybe not a good search term because we do a lot of SharePoint. I'm going to find all of our staff through here. Can I pull more profile information in as part of that? And there's a ton that you can do with that. If we think about the people cards, so the ability to hover over somebody. So if I come back in here, maybe I want to hover over Mark and see more detail than I saw in the search results. This is the people card, and it surfaces not just in SharePoint, but in Teams and Outlook, and it's got really rich detail in through here. I can click the show more, get a ton more contact information. I should not have done that. Sorry, Mark. Maybe we'll wipe that off the recording because we've got some personal information in there. But it allows me to explore deeply in through there. Now, at Envision IT, one of our products is actually around this. So we've got a tool called Staff 365 that allows us to do even richer searches through there. So we actually bring in all the Intranet ID profile data into Azure AI Search and build a rich search in here. And for clients like Smith & Anderson, we actually pull in additional content from their line of business systems, from their HRIS data, and really build an all-up view of those people. So if they're looking for a particular engineer in a particular location with particular project history, all of that content is there. They can search and pull in through there. Maybe I'll use my own as an example here to drill deeper, but we can get into more details. I can go to a profile page. We actually have all of our social information up in here. In fact, if you want to play with it yourself, you can come over into our public website. We cleared this part with our staff to say, hey, we've got an online directory, which is basically our people search with just the public data available through there. So if I find my profile through here, I can drill into that and see details and experience refiners and search as part of that. So it's not just about knowledge that's in your systems, it's the knowledge that's in people's head and surfacing that up through there as part of that. Okay. I want to go a little deeper in a search example. I'm going to use our policy center as an example as part of that as well. It's something that we built for a lot of clients. We've actually built a bunch of features into our Staff 365 product as well to go further to say, hey, let's actually use that AI search data to pull in that user profile properties and understand which staff need to sign off on which policies. We're actually about to start our final stage 1 audit with an external auditor for our ISO 27001 security designation next week. So it's very timely. For us, all of our policies apply to everybody. We're actually co-developing a bunch of this stuff with Smith & Anderson. They have a more complex policy structure because they have multiple business units. They're a partner style organization in terms of an ownership structure. They have different policies that apply to different offices and different lines of business and different job roles. So they got a fair bit of complexity about who should sign off on which policy. And we're able to build queries against AI search to say, query the staff directory with these fixed queries and figure out who needs to sign off on each of these policies. So as they write their policies, they tag them with a search query to say this policy applies to these people. And as new people get onboarded, they just light up in there as policies to sign off from. So if I come back over here, and let's go into our policy center. Actually, I've got it off our home here. There we go, policy center. Okay. So search obviously is very important. We've built a grounded search that just searches these policies. We don't have a ton. We've got 18 policies. We've been working a lot on the acceptable use of AI tools, actually planning on publicly publishing that policy and sort of a discussion paper about things that we've been thinking about, how you use AI through there. So I can drill into those policies. One of the things we want to add on to here is a Copilot Studio agent that will let you ask questions about policies. Hey, I'm not sure what policy applies in this scenario, and ground that agent to the content that's in this policy center with all the latest approved policies as part of that. So it's going to depend on the search, and then we can build further on the AI side through there. And then this is an example of a PnP search web part. This is, hey, go search the policies that Peter hasn't signed off on the latest version through there. So I can drill into, say, the acceptable use of AI policies as a policy. I'm the owner. I should sign off on it. We're actually doing a final update and review of these for next week as part of that audit. But I can come down to the bottom here, and there's an employee acknowledgement where I acknowledge that. This writes my acknowledgement into a SharePoint list. We keep it in a policy sign-off list. So we've got an auditable record of what's been done through there. Sign-off tracking, Power BI reporting, everything from there. So I'm realizing I'm going a little slow through here. So let's switch over to the smart experiences. And the AI in SharePoint that I was talking about in the beginning of the topic, let's actually have a look at what that looks like. So if I come back to the home of our intranet, because we've enabled that AI in SharePoint, I get this little AI actions tooltip here on all of my modern pages. So if I click that open, there's not a lot to summarize on this page here, but how do I actually improve this site as a content author is one of the things that it can do. And it can say, hey, is there low activity pages that we should push down on the search results? They're not maybe relevant anymore, or maybe I should take them out. It's amusing because, like I said, we don't tend to use SharePoint News as our news. We use Teams. So you can see a bunch that we did back in 2018, 2019, and it's saying, hey, you should retire all these. They haven't been looked at in a long time. And it's probably right. We're going to leave them there from a demo point of view. It can also show me things like content gaps. So what are people searching for, but they didn't find? Or is there some broken links? We don't actually have any in there. That's a common complaint that, hey, this link doesn't go anywhere. Something on the target side is moved and now it's busted. We can also create content here. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Kevin here. He's got some pre-recorded and he's going to narrate his experience as a content author using AI to create content. So Kevin, I'll let you grab the screen and take it from here.
Excellent. Yeah, and as a content author, I spend quite a bit of time building content and building pages. And so this is one of the areas where AI can really speed things up. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples of things that we can do with this. One of them is, let's create a page or a post or a news item. And so here we have our experience of, we're in our first page, we're going over the sidebar, we want to see, hey, I want to create a news item. So I can create a page, I can create a news post. And when I click on here, it's going to bring me to this template gallery. I could create something from scratch, but I actually really like that there's some pre-built functional templates. And as I'm thinking about the type of article I want to post, I can find something that fits the style I want to use. In this case, I'm going to do an example of our Claude co-work example. So I'm going to use this template, which has some pre-filled information. It's going to be put into our marketing site. And when you come into here, you can see there's a template, there's some pre-built content. I could manually go through and type and replace all of that content, but that's going to take a fair amount of time. Before, this would probably take me a couple of hours of work at least, or if I handed it off to somebody, it would take that person a couple of hours of work. So I can use the AI part of this, and I can either use a custom prompt, or I can grab the prompt at the top, and then I can say, I want to base it on this file. And so I'll actually go through and search for the file that I want to use. I can put in the name and type in Claude. It'll find the article that I was working on. And then the AI engine is basically going to go and build the page. So just to give you an idea what this is building off of, we've got this article that we've built around our experience with Claude and Copilot. And so we now have the agent that's going to go and do the work. And I've sped it up because the agent's actually going to do quite a bit of work. This type of task takes about 5 minutes. And then what we see here is it's actually going to take the template and it's going to start to restructure the page. And then it's going to build in and create the content and put it into this structure. So let's see this change in a second. And there we have our page. All of that work was based, it was granted on the article, pull it into here, and it created that page information. Yeah. And now the next thing I might look at this, I'll say, this is great, but I want to make some changes to this. So now we're going to do some edits on the fly. And this is where the really fun part comes in, because you may have existing pages that you need to change. So let's say I want to change the heading. The heading is a little bland. I want to have something a bit more exciting. I can manually go and find an image for that, but I can also ask AI to go and do that for me. So I can say, can you put in an image that represents Claude versus cowork? And then it's going to go and do the work. It will go and it will update that header. So it's gone and found a nice, much more attractive image. The other thing about this article is it's taken an article that we're writing publicly for our external audience. And so it's built some good content in here, but some of the content is actually should be adjusted for an internal audience. So I might have something like this where we've got the conclusion, but I want to add a call to action for our external staff. And again, I can write that out, but if I'm not exactly sure what to say, I can put a prompt into Copilot and say, hey, can you create a call to action? And it'll go ahead and do that. And so you can see it's changed the content dynamically based on a natural language request that I've made for that content. The other thing, like I'm showing an example of a page here, we have in our own kind of Brand Central guide for employees about how to make good presentations. Maybe I want to add a section to this. What I can do with this, normally would have had to go in and manually create an actual section. But with the AI, I can actually go up to the top and I can hit edit the page. Yeah. And aside from these AI options off to the corner here, when I actually go to edit the page, I'm going to get some new AI options right in line. And so what I'll actually be able to do with this is there's actually in the middle where the plus button is, yeah, I could type a section in here, but I can click this little button here and it will add a section using AI. And now I can either prompt something in here, but it's actually read the context of the page and said, hey, here's some suggestions to improve the page. And so, yeah, share some helpful presentation resources for the staff. Let's go ahead and do that. So I can click on that, have it generate, and now what it's going to do is it's going to effectively build that. Again, it takes a little bit of time to build, but it's gone through and built a section and it's formatted it. It's actually gone out and found external content to build that out. So I can then review this content. I can make adjustments to it. Yeah, and if I'm happy with it, then I can add it to the page, and then that'll be a live experience for our internal staff. Really, just some incredible stuff that we can do when it comes to content authoring and content changing. Peter, I'll hand it back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. Just grab the screen share back. Okay. So it's pretty amazing what Microsoft's doing in terms of supporting content authors with AI, and that's going to keep changing. There's more and more. There's lots more that Microsoft shared under NDA at the MVP Summit, and it's coming fast and furious from them. So it's a pretty exciting time from that perspective. But it's not necessarily just about building content. A lot of the focus now is about building agents and saying, hey, how can we use tools like Copilot Studio and SharePoint to build very specific agents? And this is less of a technical task than you might think. I'm not going to go into Copilot Studio itself and how you build an agent, but it is very much natural language. You actually explain in English. I'm actually not sure. I'm curious. Can you explain in other languages as well? If that's your native tongue, I would hope so. What you want your agent to do, where you want it to ground it, what kind of answers, what flow do you want to take the user through as part of that journey. And the key here is this grounding piece to say, hey, I'm going to ground this agent in a particular topic. So we think about the policy center example to say, hey, let's have an agent on the policy center that lets people ask questions about policies. And we know that it's going to use only the current published versions of our policies, and then it's going to give correct answers back based on that. And that it can provide citations, people can link in to look at the actual policy to double check, because everybody should know that they can't implicitly trust AI to give them the right answers. But you can certainly do things to influence that and bring it closer through there. We've used this ourselves in what we call our Copilot Success Kit, which is something we deploy to our clients. We're doing Copilot projects as well. It's basically a communication site targeted to Copilot itself. You're rolling out to an organization, how do we guide beginners, intermediate, pro users through their Copilot journey? And we've got a little leaderboard that shows who's actually using Copilot, but there's actually a Copilot agent that we built in Studio here as well that lets you ask questions. I think I've left this sitting on the screen for too long. But in any case, building the agents should be part of what you're thinking about in building out your intranet as well. How is it going to be consumed by AI? And how is that going to support my staff as a whole? So whether you're a content consumer or a content owner, there's a big impact from there. So from an intranet action point of view, as I said earlier, intranets aren't just a published spot. It's a place where tasks and actions happen as well. Having workflows in there, things like that policy acceptance to say, I don't just want you to read the policy, I need you to sign off to know that you've accepted it through there. And we want to feed that into a Power BI dashboard so we can see how we are as an organization from a policy acceptance point of view. There's a lot of business processes that you can build in as part of that. Power Automate is an awesome tool. We actually use Logic Apps as well, which is a more enterprise IT version of that to build out approvals and scenarios. There are templates. You can actually use AI in Power Automate and use natural language to explain what you want your workflow to do through there. Pick a couple of processes that make sense, start there and go from there. At the end of the day, building an appealing SharePoint Online modern intranet should be your goal. It should be the place where staff love to come and know they should come to find information, to find people, to find reference documents like policies and such, that it becomes the single source of the truth for all of that. And Microsoft has made it much easier to build that rich modern experience, not just the container that it's going to live in, but as Kevin showed you, to actually build the content within there. You know, you can do customization. You should definitely think about your IA, your branding, your hub site structure, customizations like web parts and things. There's a huge, rich ecosystem of things that you can do as part of that. This is an example of lots of different web parts rolling up news, rolling off events. Actually, they had a big kudos section where staff could shout out other staff members that have done something awesome for them in their job or personally, and let people acknowledge that and really build that sense of community. So there's tons of interesting things you can do as part of that. I know we're getting close to time. I wanted to leave a little bit of time in case we had some questions through there. But just circling back to our beginning, from a takeaways point of view, I think as you've seen, AI is changing everything and it's happening quickly. Think about the new SharePoint, the AI in SharePoint. Should you turn it on for some or all of your organization? How change resistant or AI ready is your organization as part of the decisions to think about in there? We can certainly help you with that. We do have Copilot readiness consulting services that we provide, as I said, to lots of our clients. And kudos to Microsoft. They've really done a great job of raising the bar through there. We've got a bunch of links to both our stuff and Microsoft articles. This one here doesn't have a hyperlink on it yet. That's the article that Kevin and I were literally working on through there. We'll get that published out before we send this out as a follow-up, and you'll be able to dig into that Claude versus Copilot scenario through there. So I haven't been watching the chat. I'm not sure if you have, Kevin, to see if we've got particular questions or things that we want to come back to on there.
Yeah, so we have a question from Moaz, and he said he's wondering, how can we leverage BI reporting to integrate with AI for pulling reports for various metrics?
It's actually a topic close to my heart. So we run our business on Power BI. We use it a lot for our operational dashboards. We actually need to be doing more on the marketing, on the sales side, pulling in HubSpot data as well as Microsoft 365 data. So it starts with just getting the data in there. I have a whole topic we're probably going to do a webinar on of how do you get the source of truth data into things like Excel and Power BI, so you can do analysis from there with it. Once you've got the data there, then it lights up things like Copilot for Power BI or Copilot for Excel that you can start doing some really interesting things. I had a aha moment last week after we turned on the Frontier features, where I've been underwhelmed with Copilot for Excel ever since it came out. It didn't seem to be able to do anything useful for me, but the agent mode, the edit in Copilot mode that Frontier lights up, actually became useful. I said, hey, take our financial data from QuickBooks and build me a live pivot chart that has cost of goods and expenses and revenue and profit, lay the legends out this way, do these stack charts, these overlaid line charts. And I built the whole thing through prompts with Copilot. It still took me probably an hour or two to build it out, but it wasn't just a picture that Claude or ChatGPT had created as a snapshot. It was a real live pivot chart connected to our underlying data sources in our semantic model. So it's pretty amazing where things can go with that.
Yeah, I don't see any other questions, but maybe just a comment from a content creator's point of view. We're really appreciating the multimodal approach that Microsoft has to AI.
Yes.
I think what we're seeing is like the AI tools they're increasing in capability really rapidly. And right now, Anthropic's better when it comes to some long form content stuff than the OpenAI model. But that may change a month from now. So we're really paying attention to where the highest level capabilities are.
Yeah, and I like the Microsoft approach of the multi-model to say, hey, we're not locked into one vendor's AI model. We're open to sub-processors. And right now there's only two choices, OpenAI and Anthropic. It'd be interesting to see how that ecosystem evolves. Cool. Why don't we give a couple minutes back to people? I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope you learned something new and got some interesting takeaways to take back to your organization. If you're interested in help, whether it's on the AI and Copilot side, on the intranet AI and design side, we're happy to help. We do lots of those engagements with clients, so love to have a conversation about that. And with that, I'll sign off. Thanks, everybody.